Hey, what's up guys, it's Thunderstruck115, and today, we are going to be taking a look at a video of somebody saying that Doom the Dark Ages will suck because it's not Metroid Prime 4. Now, Doom the Dark Ages looks fucking fantastic, and Metroid Prime 4 also looks fucking fantastic. But for some reason, our good old friend Harman Smith just can't seem to be happy for everybody and instead has to praise Metroid Prime 4 by putting down another game. And of all the games you could have used as a comparison for Metroid Prime 4, Doom the Dark Ages is fucking terrible seeing as it plays nothing like Metroid. But anyways, let's go ahead and get right into this shit.
So we all know that Nintendo absolutely won this June game showcase season, right? They stopped PlayStation, they stopped Xbox, they stopped Ubisoft, they stopped like the entire Marvel Ultimate Alliance of other competitors that were coming out trying to sell you on Xbox, PlayStation, and PC, right?
I mean, well, I definitely think that Nintendo Direct put the State of Play and the Summer Games Fest to shame. It doesn't exactly take a lot to outdo the likes of that shit. As for the Xbox Showcase, I think that's debatable. Personally, I think I'd put the Nintendo Direct just ever so slightly above it, though I might be biased because of Metroid Prime 4. But no, Xbox also had a pretty good showing.
Nintendo came out and just proved that their 7-year-old console is still, like, the market leader, and will continue to be so for quite some time. Which is why you're seeing so many people, like, adamant that, like, oh, Nintendo's gonna replace the Switch soon. They need it to happen so PlayStation and Xbox are in a stronger position, right?
How exactly would that put PlayStation and Xbox in a stronger position? I mean, unless their next console is absolute dog shit. But no, I really don't think anyone's out there claiming that Nintendo isn't the market leader, at least when it comes to the console space. I mean, literally just look at the fucking numbers and that'll tell you everything. But no, the reason why people want Nintendo to release a new console is because, as it stands, the Nintendo Switch is woefully underpowered. Not only is it 7 years old, but even at the time of its release, it was outdated. And a new piece of hardware where Nintendo can keep releasing really good games on, but now they can run them at a much better level of performance, would be absolutely amazing, and if anything, would only put Nintendo in a stronger position. Because right now, the biggest criticism that I've seen levied at Nintendo is that their console is not powerful enough and it runs their games like complete dog shit. I mean, look at Tears of the Kingdom, it's a great fucking game, but my biggest issue is the fact that it would often drop frames, which is really distracting and fucks with the overall game feel.
So, yeah, it's right now people are coping and seething about this. I talked about this already, but I do think the big takeaway, the big thing I want to talk about now, because I talked about like my general impressions of the Direct. I talked about like, you know, all the great games that are coming out. I've talked about how they're coming out this year. There's a lot of things that I have talked about, but now it's time to talk about like more fringe topics. You know, what exactly is okay, is Metroid Prime 4 going to be better than Doom the Dark Ages?
Well, that really depends on what you mean by better. Like, if you're talking about, like, which one's going to do better, then that's definitely going to be Doom, seeing as Metroid is quite niche, whereas Doom has a lot of mainstream appeal. If you're talking about which game you're going to prefer, well, then that's really up to subjective opinion on which type of game you prefer. And if you're trying to say which one is going to be the objectively better game, well, that's a stupid fucking comparison then, seeing as Metroid Prime and Doom are two very different types of games. Doom is a first-person arena shooter that focuses primarily on combat, meanwhile Metroid Prime doesn't even have combat as a main focus, and instead focuses more on exploration, puzzle solving, and immersion. Like, Doom and Metroid Prime could not be further apart in terms of its gameplay, and this is a pretty stupid fucking comparison to make.
Yes, absolutely. There is no doubt in my mind that Metroid is a far stronger, more relevant, more successful franchise than Doom.
That's an interesting claim there, bucko. Let's see if it holds up. To the video game sales wiki! Well, if we take a look at the Metroid series and go to its most recent release, that being Metroid Prime Remastered on the Switch, it sold 1.09 million copies. Of course, that is a remaster of a GameCube game, so let's also take a look at the most recent actual new Metroid game, that being Metroid Dread, which sold 3.07 million copies. Now let's take a look at the most recent Doom game, that being Doom Eternal, which, according to VG Insight, sold 5.7 million units, which, by the way, this number is only counting Steam sales. So this figure does not include anybody that may have bought it on another launcher, like say the Bethesda launcher before it got taken down. It also does not take into account the people that bought this game on console. On top of that, it also does not count the people that may have played this via Xbox Game Pass. Now, I tried to find data for all of that, but I couldn't, no matter where I looked. But regardless, any sales data that I could find for the consoles would only paint a picture that Doom is the more relevant IP than Metroid, so, looks like you were completely wrong about this one, Harman.
Metroid Dread was hugely successful. Prime 4 will build off of that success. To the point where I honestly expect that Prime 2 and 3 Remastered will continue to build off the Metroid IP. Will continue just growing the franchise to the point where the franchise is no longer considered niche, right?
Hold on, Harman. I thought you said earlier that Metroid was bigger than fucking Doom, and yet now you're saying that the Metroid series is pretty niche? Well, seeing as the Doom series is not niche by any stretch of the imagination, I'm gonna have to ask you to
keep that same energy.
Because this has always been the real problem with Metroid, right? Is that the games are really critically beloved. People love them. They are really popular Nintendo games among the core Nintendo audience. But outside of that, you don't have a lot of people who pick them up on whims, and you don't have a lot of casual players, and you have this weird tendency among general audiences to kind of write off every game that isn't Super or Prime, right?
My guy, are we gonna fucking ignore Metroid Dread? Because last I checked, there was quite a lot of hype and buzz around that game. Not to mention, it's quite literally the best-selling game in the entire series, unless of course you combine the sales of Prime 1 and Prime 1 Remastered. Not to mention, Dread quite literally got nominated for Game of the Year back in 2021, so yeah, looks like you're completely wrong once again.
I've talked about this before, but people love banging on about how Metroid is their favorite Nintendo IP and how it's so good and stuff like that, and yet every single Metroid release kind of goes underappreciated in the grand scheme of things, right? It took a long time for Dread to be seen as being on par with Super.
No, there were plenty of people back when Dread first launched saying that it was on par with, if not even better than Super. I mean, I personally wouldn't say it's better than Super. I do think Super has the better world design, but there are definitely plenty of things that Dread does really well. Dread's world design doesn't really slack either, and I think the controls are really good as well. The boss fights are really good. But no, even back when it launched, people fucking loved it. Well, unless your name is David Jaffe or Tim Deuces, which I know I've been saying I'm gonna fucking respond to that for the past 2 years at this point. I'll get to it eventually.
Prime 3 was disrespected back in the day. Prime 2 got a lot of flack. We went into Prime 1 being told by game journos that oh, this game is going to be terrible. We were told that, right?
Now, obviously, I wasn't there at the time because I was too young, but from what I've seen, fans were concerned when they saw Prime 1 because they were afraid it was going to turn into another Doom or another Halo. But then when the game actually released and they got to play it for themselves, they realized, holy shit, this game is fucking awesome. As for Prime 2, that's seen quite a bit of a renaissance, as I've seen a lot of people actually put that above Prime 1. Not everyone, mind you, but it's still held in high regard by fans of the series.
Metroid Fusion was attacked back in the day, and there are fringe fanboys who will tell you that Super completely misses the point of the original Metroid because it has a map.
Maybe this dude ran into some fringe motherfucker, because I have literally never once seen anybody complain that Super Metroid has a map or try to claim that Super Metroid isn't as good as the original NES game. If anything, I'll often hear people criticize the original Metroid for not having a map screen, as well as other things such as not having fucking recharge stations.
There has always been this weird mindset among fans that Metroid should be a very, very specific thing, a hardcore game franchise for hardcore gamers, and yet they never seem to turn out for it, right?
That's right, we just never turn out for these Metroid games, do we?
You don't see the blind worship for Metroid that you see for something like Doom Eternal, right? Because Doom Eternal was pure crap, but you're seeing a lot of people come out and try to say it was one of the best first-person shooters ever and one of the best games ever made, and a really good way to cap off the Doom franchise. Oh, it's the best ever.
I mean, in terms of its gameplay, yeah, people fucking loved it because it was so refined. It took everything that was great about the older Doom games and then added a bunch of new shit on top of it and refined the combat loop to be the best it's ever been. Now, that's not to say that I think it's perfect. I do have some criticisms, like the lack of a traditional deathmatch mode, or the lack of snap map, or the fact that they kind of butchered the lore in the DLC. But to say that it was complete crap is just a stretch of the century.
Like, Metroid is just, it's better not to pretend that every single thing that comes out is now like the best thing ever, the way that like PlayStation and Xbox fans do. But
okay, Harman, let's be completely honest. You do that exact same thing. The only difference is that you do it for Nintendo instead of PlayStation or Xbox.
Like, on the other hand, like, it is kind of frustrating when like games like Metroid Dread do become hugely successful, do become popular. Like, I believe Metroid Dread is the best-selling Metroid game ever at this point, right? And yet, is anybody acknowledging that? Is anybody acknowledging how good it was? How it has like the best antagonist in the series history? That it has like some of the best gameplay mechanics? That it's like really, really endlessly replayable? That it's like that there's all these cool like, again, there's so many like aspects to Metroid Dread that make it spectacular, but it got written off for petty, inconsequential reasons.
Like I said before, the overall reception around Metroid Dread was very positive. The only real issues that I heard people bring up was the fact that it was $60 despite the game only being like 4 hours long, which personally I don't really have an issue with because of how replayable it is. Like, I really don't know why this dude's playing revisionist history to make it seem like people didn't really care for Metroid Dread. I mean, sure, it's still pretty niche because it's in a niche franchise, but the public opinion around this game was positive overall.
Again, like, it's a give or take kind of thing. Like, I wish Metroid got more praise for what it was. I wish more people noticed how good, like, games like Metroid Dread, and No More Heroes 3, and Shin Megami Tensei 5 were. Like, those were all, like, games that were hated when they first came out, like, a couple years ago, right? But, now, like, I don't know, when I compare it to what happened with Doom, like, people just, like, sitting there on their YouTube channels trying to tell you that like this is the best game. Like, it's absurd. It really is patently absurd, and it really should be called out more.
That's right, guys. We need to call out people who are simply excited for a new Doom game. Never mind that the past couple Doom games have been really good. Never mind that the trailer looked fucking good. No, we gotta call this shit out, right, guys? Oh, that's right. It's because it's not coming to his precious Nintendo Switch. Oh, and it's because it's not Metroid. Excellent fucking logic there, my guy.
If anything. But yeah, like, Metroid Prime 4, I think, assuming it's even just like a copy of what they did with Metroid Prime 1, because Metroid Prime 1 is still better than like the modern Doom games. Assuming Metroid Prime 4 is exactly like the older Prime games, it's gonna be better than Doom, for sure. Because those games had creative boss designs, amazing environments, like stellar music, great animations,
And Doom didn't have all those things? I mean, granted, I wouldn't say the boss fights in Doom Eternal were perfect, but they're definitely better than the ones in Prime, seeing as Doom is actually a combat-focused game, unlike the Metroid Prime games. In fact, if I'm being completely honest, I think most of the bosses in Prime 1 are kinda shit, to be honest. But no, Metroid Prime is great, the Doom games are great, I really don't know why you have to put down the fucking Doom games. Like, seriously, dude, why the fuck can't we just be happy that both of them are doing well?
All these great unique mechanics. Like, Prime just really is an innovator when it comes to first-person adventure games.
And Doom is a big innovator when it comes to first-person shooter games. What is your point?
Right, Doom, all you do is, like, run around in circles and, like, shoot the same generic enemies all throughout the game, right?
It's funny that he describes Doom that way when that's literally how the combat works in the Metroid Prime games. You literally have a fucking lock-on mechanic, so you circle strafe around the enemy and just shoot them till they die. Which, to be clear, I'm not saying that's like a huge flaw of the Metroid Prime games, seeing as combat is not the focus there. But the thing is, you can literally say that any game is fucking stupid if you just boil it down to its bare essentials enough. Like, if I were to do that for the Metroid Prime games, you're just walking around this world collecting upgrades so you can open new paths to get new upgrades. The thing is, both games do a lot of shit with their gameplay loops to make it fun and engaging.
But with Metroid, you're going through all these unique environments, traversing them in unique ways, encountering, like, unique enemies. Like, it's embarrassing, honestly, how much better that, like, a game from 2002 is compared to, like, the 2016 Doom game, right? Like, it's crazy how much better Metroid manages to do the same kind of like thing, manages to do its thing better than Doom does, right? To do the same kind of like thing.
Absolutely fucking not. They are not trying to do the same thing whatsoever. Doom is focused on giving you a fast-paced combat loop, whereas Metroid Prime is focused on giving you an interesting world to explore. And I'm just gonna say this, the enemies in Doom are 10 times more interesting than any of the enemies in Metroid Prime. Which, I know I keep reiterating this, but that is not a fault of Prime, seeing as that's not the kind of game that Metroid Prime is. Again, if you prefer Metroid Prime, that is perfectly fine, but comparing these two games is kinda stupid when they aren't trying to do anything close to the same thing as each other.
Like, it's really not even close. But, like, again, casual versus hardcore, right? You know, the casual Doom fan can't appreciate the nuances and the depths and the complexity of, like, the hardcore Metroid game, right? Like, that is the issue here. It's always been the issue when it comes to Nintendo versus third-party discourse, is that people think, you know, getting high scores from game journals or, like, selling up a zillion copies somehow makes a game better than it's Nintendo competition.
I mean, while I will agree that more sales and higher review scores doesn't necessarily mean that the product itself is better, at the same time, I don't really see anybody trying to make the claim that it means it's better outside of console fanboys on Twitter. If anything, it's more like the other way around, where having a good game means it's probably going to sell more copies and get higher review scores. But there are a lot more factors into how many copies a game sells, such as how much brand recognition it has, as well as just how much appeal it has to the bigger audience. And the fact of the matter is, Doom just has more mass appeal than Metroid. That doesn't mean that Metroid is worse. And on top of that, you should never really take review scores seriously, given how fucking retarded game journalists are.
Even when Nintendo games outsell their competition. You know, how long were we told that, like, Nintendo was losing Game of the Year awards because, like, oh, they're not popular enough, they're not mainstream enough. And then, like, you know, Animal Crossing New Horizons becomes, like, the most mainstream game on the planet, and it loses the Game of the Year award to Last of Us Part 2.
Again, that's more just an issue of game journalists being fucking retarded, because I don't know of a single person in 2020 that wanted The Last of Us 2 to win Game of the Year outside of gaming journalists and PlayStation fanboys. Pretty much everybody else was either rooting for Doom Eternal, Animal Crossing, Hades, Ghost of Tsushima, or even Final Fantasy VII Remake. And in this case, it's not a specific bias against Nintendo. In fact, I'd say Nintendo's probably one of the more favored companies among gaming journalists.
Right? Like, again, this has nothing to do with sales or the quality of the games or you know, what the audience wants, right? It's purely fanboy propaganda.
Have you looked in the mirror lately?
And I do think this is, like, the issue that Doom fans are going to have going into to Metroid Prime, is that, like, yeah, Doom might sell better.
No, there's no might about it. Short of Bethesda and id Software royally screwing up, Doom is absolutely going to outsell Metroid Prime 4.
It might get higher review scores. It might be more talked about among, like, you know, young men, right? It might have, like, a, you know, oh, it's made by Bethesda. It might be, like, it might have all the hype, all the enthusiasm, all, like, the propaganda, right? Game journals are going to get behind it, right? But long term, it's going to have to compete with Metroid.
I mean, I guess it technically will, but at the same time, like I described a bunch of times earlier, Metroid and Doom are made for two completely different audiences because they are two completely different types of games. That's like saying that Elden Ring has to compete with Call of Duty.
You know, it is going to have to compete with a better game from a better studio, from a more discerning audience, right? An audience that actually respects, you know, quality games and will actually put the time and effort into playing all sorts of things from different developers and different genres, right? Like something like Doom, you know, the most basic entry-level FPS franchise there is.
No, that would be Call of Duty.
Like, can't compete with Metroid Prime.
I swear, this dude's whole narrative keeps changing. At the beginning of the video, he was saying how Metroid was just this bigger and more recognizable franchise than Doom. Then he started lamenting the fact that Metroid wasn't getting as much praise and recognition as Doom, and now he's trying to act like Metroid Prime 4 is going to be looked on more fondly than Doom the Dark Ages. Like, dude, please do me a favor and
keep that same energy.
Is the long and short of it. Like, this is going to be a repeat, I think, of
You might want to answer your phone there, Harman. It's probably your mom asking when you're gonna
get a fucking job and get off of YouTube.
And that is the same thing Doom Guy is in right now. Like, Doom Guy is known for like one very specific thing, being Doom Guy, and yet the character has no nuance, he has no personality. People don't like the character, right?
Well, I'm not gonna say that Doom Guy is exactly the deepest fucking character out there. At the same time, people do like him, and he does have a personality of basically just being too fucking angry to die, which does a very good job of complementing the gameplay loop of Doom.
Like, it's just something that people do to try and pretend that they're like hardcore, more hardcore than they are. Like, Doom in a lot of ways is like the Dark Souls of FPS games, right? Meanwhile, Samus is an actual popular character who's actually recognizable, actually has a personality, a unique design, a background, a real legacy in history.
I mean, I don't entirely disagree with Harman here, but at the same time, Doom is not really a story-driven game, and Metroid, when compared to Doom, has a lot more emphasis on story.
Spanning several games over the decades, right? And again, this is my issue. We spent the mid-10s, right? We spent from 2010 to 2016. People were complaining about not getting any Metroid games from that period. And here we are, in 2024, coming off of Samus Returns and Federation Force and Metroid Dread and now Prime 4. And nobody is celebrating Samus's glorious return,
I'm Blind Beard the Pirate! Oop.
Yeah, again, that is a complete lie. Metroid fans have definitely been celebrating the fact that Metroid is basically in its second golden age. On top of that, these Metroid fans are probably busy actually playing the game, so there's that as well.
When, Doom had, a bigger gap in releases, you know what happened when Doom went through its hiatus? Nobody cared. Nobody remembered it. Nobody wanted it to come back because they knew in their heart of hearts that there was nothing Doom could do to compete in the modern market.
Now, I was pretty young when Doom was on its hiatus, so I wasn't really following that discourse very closely. But given how much of a disappointment that Doom 3 was, as well as the fact that trends for the modern shooter genre at the time were moving away from what Doom stood for, I'm sure a lot of people were concerned that if Doom returned, it wouldn't really capture the same magic as it did in the 90s. Of course, when Doom 2016 released, it proved that it still had it, so glad that a reboot of a classic series could actually go well for once. But by the way, if you're somebody that was a Doom fan back during that time and I got that sequence of events wrong, feel free to let me know in the comments.
Meanwhile, Metroid is a very unique, very interesting franchise that people desperately wanted to come back, right? Metroid is an absolutely stellar IP that needs a lot more attention and appreciation for what it is.
And just like that, the video is over. I actually do agree with that last statement. I do think Metroid is an amazing IP, but comparing it to Doom is pretty fucking stupid because it plays nothing like Doom. They are two completely different genres with two completely different appeals. Again, it's fine to prefer one over the other, but trying to say that one completely trounces the other is fucking stupid because of that. So I guess the key takeaway here is that just because you're excited for one thing, you don't have to make that thing look better by putting down something else. You can be excited for multiple types of games. And on top of that, if you're gonna make these kind of comparisons, you should do them with games that are more similar to each other, because this comparison was just absolute fucking dog shit. But anyways, that's gonna be it for this video. If you enjoyed, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe for more, and tell me what you think of Harman's ridiculous takes yet again. Anyways, that's it. Peace!